Hello, I'm SB Moores, and today I wanted to make another video about The Black Company by Glenn Cook. I made a video a couple weeks back about it, but it had been some years since I had read The Black Company for the first time. I read it all the way back in early high school, so like maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that. So I was a little hazy on it. I reread the first chapter in order to get myself reacquainted and maybe remember some stuff. But after I made the video, I was thinking about it a lot, and I also got the entire collection recently. So I reread the first Black Company book, and with this new copy, and I'm already some of the way into Shadows Linger, the next book, which I intend to finish sometime in the next few weeks, probably within this week, I would hope. They're not particularly long books, and I feel like that's a lot of the charm because most epic fantasy you see is rather long. The Wheel of Time, The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, Malazan, uh, all quite long, all very epic. But the Black Company definitely sets itself apart from those, especially with being very genre defining for the kind of epic fantasy this is, for it also being a military fantasy. This is going to be full general spoilers for the Black Company. I will probably mention a few specific things. I don't know if I'm going to talk at length about every aspect of the book. I just wanted to go over some stuff that I think I missed in the other book and go into a little more in depth than I did before. So this is full spoilers for The Black Company, the first book in the Books of the North, or the Chronicles of the Black Company. So you have been warned. But since rereading this book, I really started to remember why I liked it so much. Even reading that first chapter a couple weeks ago, I was remembering, or I had always remembered why I liked it. I remember I really loved the soldiers and the banter they had, some of the ideas that were very different from a lot of the fantasy I've read. Some of them are kind of classical, but they have this new spin on it that I hadn't read before. Before the Black Company, I had read the Stormlight Archive, Kings of the Wild, I believe, and then I think I had read one of the Legends of Drizzt book, which are all very classical. Well, not the Stormlight Archive, but some of those were very classical. And I had also read some sci-fi, such as Ringworld, I believe, at the time, or I might have read that after. But the Black Company was my first foray into grimdark, first of all, as well as military fantasy and anything first person. I had never read anything in first person before that. And since rereading it, it's just been it's a very interesting book compared to a lot of the fantasy I read, especially all the way from the opening line, I believe, until the end. And I think the first thing I'll talk about with the Black Company is Croker himself. After having reread the book, I have come to a much more appreciative I become much more appreciative of Croker being the narrator, being the physician, as well as a brother of the Black Company and the keeper of the annals. Um, Reading through the whole book again, it's really nice to see how Croker is he's so involved with the Black Company itself, being the analyst, knowing the history of it. And the way that history is presented in the Black Company being so different from most epic fantasy you see. With certain things that he mentions. He mentions that in this copy, it's only mentioned once, I believe, but in the beginning or before the book even starts, in the smaller copy I have, it has a little blurb that doesn't appear in this book. I don't know if it appears in any others, but it appears in that one. And it mentions that the Black Company are the last free company of the 12 original mercenary bands that came from a place called Katavar. Um, we don't get any more than that, which is really it's an approach to world building that you do see in some things where things are mentioned that don't really have a lot of history that's mentioned. But with the Black Company especially, this feels like lost lore. And because it's written in the style first person as an annals, a lot of what Croker says is stuff that he would assume the person reading it would understand, which adds a flavor to the text where it almost removes us a little bit from it, or at least it removed me from understanding it, but it added so much intrigue and it made the world feel much more real. What I mean by that is every now and again he will mention something that it seems we should know, but we don't because we're not from the world that the Black Company comes from. He mentions the Jewel Cities. He mentions a little bit of history about the Lady and the Dominator and the Domination, but not a whole lot. That, though, is one aspect that not a lot of the other characters know, considering they're not even from this continent that they're on. But there are certain instances where Croker will mention something that it really seems like we should know, or it's something that he assumes that the reader would understand, but we don't get. Now, I think that Glenn Cook is able to blend this perfectly with this also being a novel in our world, because it doesn't exactly read as a one-to-one annals of something that's happening, what with Croker describing events play by play at times. Not always, but every now and again he'll go play by play quoting people. Or you could also take that to mean that Croker is always writing when he's having small conversations with people, or that he has a really good memory, or that he's paraphrasing, he's guessing at what they said. He remembers the generalness of what happened. Maybe he remembers some affectations people have. And that's another thing that's so good about Croker. He's very good at characterizing the members of the Black Company. And I had remembered always enjoying them, but after rereading it, it became so much more abundantly clear to me how much I enjoyed certain aspects of the characters, specifically with people like Goblin and One Eye and Silent, all three of the mages, the captain, the lieutenant, and Elmo, especially. I really enjoy a lot of chapters or a lot of the sections where we get to speak with people like Elmo. And specifically with the fact that they are a brotherhood and that the Black Company are so close that it is the home to them. And there was a specific line that I remember reading, and it was after Croker did one of his monthly assemblies where he read from the annals to the Black Company. And Raven, who is just recently joined, who at this point is starting to get closer to them, but this is right before he sort of takes that downward descent where he becomes a little more secluded from the Black Company and almost pushes them off a little bit, and he becomes kind of an agitator, wanting to be left alone, wanting Darling to be left alone. But it was after this that Raven looks to him, and they have a little discussion, and Raven tells him that he really felt what it meant to be a member of the Black Company in that. And it's moments like these that happen throughout this book that really paint the picture of the camaraderie that the Black Company feel together. And I feel like that's one of the things that Glenn Cook does best is making them feel like soldiers that care about one another, the soldiers that are friends. These are not just people who live in the same town together because they don't have a home. The home is the company itself. And I'm assuming that his skill in this is very much, besides just his actual writing skills, which are quite good, especially for the specific style that he's developed for this Black Company, um, for the Black Company novels and his novels, I would assume in general. I've read a little bit of the first book or the fourth book in the Dread Empire series because I was recommended to read the fourth and fifth before reading the first three. Fire in His Hands, I think is what it's called. But I don't remember too much of how that was written. I know it wasn't first person, so it was different in those regards. But it really, I would assume that a lot of his skill in that is due to the fact that he was a soldier at one point. And I would assume that that had a great deal of influence on his work, characterizing these soldiers and their soldiering together, the camaraderie between them. And I feel like a lot of my favorite moments, oddly enough, or maybe not oddly, this is probably a lot of people's favorite moments, are the moments when the Black Company has nothing to do. The intermittent moments when they are free to just enjoy themselves for a little bit and do the hobbies that they do in between the warfare. Moments that come to mind are the constant bickering between One Eye and Goblin, which is obviously not real bickering for most of the time, but it's these playful gags that they play against each other, and it's so fun how he does the magic in these books as well. With that, how strange and soft it is as a magic system compared to even Malazan has a harder magic system than this. Even though the magic system in Malazan is kind of a combination of soft and hard, where there are the warrens and the tiles and the holds, and all that's understandable. We really still don't know how magic itself works, like why these rituals are the way they are in Malazan. And that's good for that series, but in this one, it's even looser than that. We don't really know where magic comes from in this world. It's just sort of something that mages are able to tap into, which is itself really interesting. I There's one scene in particular that stood out to me in the first book where One Eye conjures snakes while they're up top on a hill. I think this is around chapter 4 or 5 when they are in the end of the Windy Country or the Plain of Fear and or the Stair of Tear, I mean, and they're preparing for a battle. And I think they're in enemy territory at this point. But Goblin conjures, I think, purple snakes or just snakes in general that have his face on them. And that imagery was so wacky and strange at the time. I remember reading it and I was thinking, wow, this is really bizarre. But you also got to think that this is supposed to be also a gag. They're playing jokes on each other. This is a prank. So they're not actually trying to harm each other, even if these could give them a nasty bite. But it was also just funny at the same time because it's just such a strange and humorous thing for One Eye to do. Conjure snakes that have his own face on them. Like, it sounds terrifying when you think about it. If you saw a snake with a human face in real life, that would just be horrifying. And whenever I read a book like these, I try and imagine them as realistically as possible to look like maybe a video you would see. And I don't know if that's just me, if some people imagine them more cartoony or if they imagine a much more ephemeral, ethereal way of picturing these books. But for me, I imagine them as realistically as possible. So for me, I was thinking of a very realistic snake that for some reason its head morphed into One Eyes, which was very creepy in my head. But it was also funny and it was very vivid for me. And the jokes that they play on each other really play into that camaraderie I was talking about. And it really characterizes the Black Company as a whole. Besides just characterizing these individual characters like One Eye, Croaker, Goblin, Silent, and Raven, and the Captain, Lieutenant, and Elmo, and the plethora of other characters that we see, it really characterizes what the company as is itself. Because I feel like a lot of the time the company as a whole, just beyond these individual characters we see, is a character unto itself. I've heard that stated by, I believe it was said, I read something online where the person stated that it was something that Glenn Cook himself had stated that the Black Company is a character. These books, even though they have to follow the individual characters being the annals themselves are following the company as a whole. The company as a group. The company is its own character. And a lot of that character I feel would transition quite nicely into a different era of the Black Company. I kind of get the feeling that even in times of turmoil before this and after this, maybe times when the company wasn't as stable, the company has always had this edge to it, this camaraderie that we see. And I mean, that makes sense because um, I feel like the Black Company wouldn't be able to function because that is how this company is, and I feel like it's very traditional for the company, especially with the way that Croker does these monthly readings, and he mentions that it's supposed to boost morale and remind them where they came from, and I believe that plays into how the company itself is a character. Beyond this, and I think these are the best moments, absolutely, is when they play cards. And there's one scene in particular where I believe the Black Company, a couple members of it, have stormed a base and now they're laying low and they just are allowed to do whatever they want in this one area. Like it's a fort of some kind or a small building. And a couple of the characters are just sitting around playing cards. And I feel like Glenn Cook's description of how these things work with sometimes his curt, shorter sentences that stack onto one another, he doesn't really go into that depth where you'll have or that floweriness where you'll have a paragraph that is just one sentence or two sentences makes like a paragraph that's like yay big, which I do enjoy, but I really like the way Glenn Cook writes shorter ones. And there was this moment where I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Croker just says, the guys were all standing around a table, cards materialized, I was dealt a hand. And it was so sudden and so quick, and it felt so normal that it made me smile when this happened. I reread it twice, I think, because I just really enjoyed the way that it was described. It was just these characters, all of a sudden they have nothing to do. They're just sitting around, cards materialize. They don't even know who had the cards, but they just came out and it felt so natural. They just started playing. Croker was dealt in a hand, Croker was dealing after that, and it was fun. I also enjoy the conversations that they have and how, since Croker's telling this in first person, his thoughts can kind of meander while this happens, where they'll be playing Tonk or cards or whatever they play, uh, and suddenly Croker's thinking about something that a character said, but then he has to interrupt that thought because someone asks something about the game, and he has to start dealing his cards out. And that to me just made the flow of the book feel so much more natural. And I feel like it's these moments of interlude almost that add a lot of the depth that makes at least the first book, so enjoyable. Beyond this, the world building itself, like I said earlier, can at times be confusing, or maybe not confusing, but details are left out because they're assumptions made by Croker that you would just know. It's something that doesn't need to be explained, like the Jewel Cities. Although in that particular instance, I have a feeling that that itself wouldn't need to really be explained regardless, because everybody knows what a city is. The Jewel Cities are, I'm guessing, a ton of a grouping of free cities that are just nicknamed that for whatever reason. The lore is not pertinent to the text, or maybe it is, but maybe if we knew some of that, the ideas behind the Lady and the Dominator and the 10 who were taken would be a little more fleshed out, but that's not the kind of story that's being told. And speaking of the kind of story that's being told, and it's something that I definitely forgot, and I mentioned in my first video, is that while the Black Company is grimdark in the sense that the company don't really care who they work for who gets them the most money, I forgot how pervasive it is that every now and again, the company themselves are able to understand whether or not they are working for good or evil. And that definitely came across with Croker towards the end of the book when he has a scene with the lady, where throughout most of this book, or throughout the first couple chapters, Croker is viewing the lady in this very mystical, ethereal, lovey-dovey kind of way, actually, where he writes romances with her in it, which is, you know, definitely interesting. But I feel like it makes sense considering Croker seems to like enjoy writing regardless of it being the annals or not. But towards the middle of the book, when he meets the lady for the first couple times, he stops getting that because he is freaked out by her, which is more from the fact that she's so magically powerful and strange and ancient, with the glowing eye, and the fact that he loses time whenever he's with her. And that I could definitely understand. That would definitely creep anybody out. But it's especially towards the end when they're chasing Soulcatcher and they're chasing down the Limber. And certain other things happens, and Croker really comes to this conclusion where he finally realizes, he's like, the lady is not good. She is evil based off of what he sees her do, and he comes to these ideas of what's really going to happen when the lady's empire is in good times, when the rebel is taken down, and he's almost disgusted to the point where when they're making their way back to the tower at Charm, he almost pushes or almost lets her fall off of the flying carpet, which is very interesting, and I really enjoy it because it shows that even though the Black Company are this group that's just sort of does what they do to get paid because war is what they are, fighting is what they are, and the camaraderie between it all. Um, a lot of the Black Company still has a conscience. I think he does make mention at one point that not every member of the Black Company is very savory, that at times they do despicable things of their own accord. But he does mention, I believe, that he does not necessarily agree with everything they're forced to do. And I think it's even mentioned that because they've become so elite by the end of the first group, that they are not given the ghastly tasks that a lot of the other groups are. Um, Further building on a point I made earlier with the magic, now I'm thinking about it, and the world building and the world itself, is how almost all over the place it can feel. but in a good way. Um, with the amount of stuff that Glenn Cook really adds to it, because the company itself, I feel like at times you could definitely place it as feeling very classical, that European medieval kind of fantasy style to it. But that's not really what you can do because the characters all feel like they could come from different cultures. You have characters like Bone Gnasher who are these hulking figures, and then alternatively you go over and you have Soulcatcher who's wearing that black morion, which itself is very odd. I've seen a rendition of it done that painted a very strange picture. And then, but then alternatively, you'll have characters like that using flying carpets, which is very Aladdin-esque to me, and I believe that stems from Arabian Nights, I believe. Uh, don't quote me on that. Maybe that's my ignorance showing, but it almost feels like a mishmash of all of these different fantastical ideas throughout our own history thrown together into this world that still feels realistic and complete for a fantasy world. Um, I especially like how, even though it's high fantasy, he doesn't go quite to the extent that Tolkien or Malazan does with certain aspects, which is also to do with the fact that Croker assumes you know a lot of this stuff, where the continent itself that they're on doesn't even have like a proper name. It's just called the continent or the northern continent. And then there's the southern continent that they mention they come from. And it all builds together in this book to make the Black Company so unique and enjoyable, for me especially, that it really does lead into this idea I spoke about in my previous video that I'll reiterate, which is an idea that I've heard some other people have, which is that there are two eras of fantasy. There was before Glenn Cook and the Black Company, and then there is after the Glenn Cook and Black Company. And I can definitely understand that because I feel like the Black Company could definitely be genre defining for the very specific kind of fantasy that it is writing, with it being a military fantasy that also has these epic notes about it while also still feeling very grounded, being on the soldier's perspective of everything. And altogether, I think it made for an excellent book. And I myself am very excited to be going into Shadows Linger. And I'm on chapter 12 of that out of I think about 40 or 50. But they're very small chapters, so I should be done it relatively soon. I try and read about 10 chapters a day if I'm able to. I haven't read a couple chapters of these. I've actually dove into reading the first two chapters of Dust of Dreams and the first chapter of The Book of the New Sun, or The Shadow of the Torturer by Gene Wolfe, which is its own undertaking. That might have to get put on the back burner though, in order to catch up on the Black Company and to finish Malazan, which is definitely a priority in terms of my reading. But those are some additional thoughts that I had about the Black Company. I just wanted to discuss them a little bit, having reread the book, and it's been on my mind, and I remembered a lot more of specific instances that happened throughout the book. But I hope that you enjoyed the video. There'll be more on the way soon, both about the Black Company, Malazan, and I was thinking about doing a video, though I haven't read it in a while as well, about the Legend of Drizzt first trilogy. Uh, Being Homeland, Exile, and Sojourn by R.A. Salvatore. So you have that to look forward to if you enjoy any of these videos I make and if you enjoy any of those series. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good day.